Today is December 16th, 2017, and we're in the process of, actually this is the second day of Hanukkah, and we are going to be reading in Chapter 10 of Book 12 of the Antiquities of the Jews by Josephus, as we're researching information about Hanukkah this year. So first we're going to pray and ask our Heavenly Family for help. Heavenly Family, we love you so very much. We pray your hand of blessing upon this feast and your people, and I pray that our hearts would be opened, our minds would be open to receiving the truth. And sister, I pray that you would guide us into all truth as we're studying these very difficult accounts of history to try to figure out what is true and what is not true. And I pray and I thank you for all the information that we do have and all the archaeology digs and everything, just discovering incredible things more and more in this day. So we ask your hand of blessing upon us in the name of the branch, he and she. Amen. Okay, well, last night we went over Chapter 9, and before we go over recapping that chapter, I just wanted to mention something that I had been researching a little bit today, and that is the last sentence of Chapter 9 says this: "But when King Antiochus found that Philip had already possessed himself of the government, he made war against him and subdued him, and took him and slew him. Now Onias, the son of the high priest, who, as we before informed you, was left a child when his father died, when he saw that the king had slain his uncle Menelaus, and given the high priesthood to Alchemus, who was not of the high priest stock, but was induced by Lysias to translate that dignity from his family to another house, fled to Ptolemy, king of Egypt. And when he found that he was in great esteem with him and with his wife Cleopatra, he desired to obtain a place in the Nomus of Heliopolis, where he built a temple like that at Jerusalem, of which thereafter we shall hereafter give an account in a place more proper for it." And so Josephus is telling us that he's going to tell us more about this later. So I looked up a little bit about this temple. We went to Antiquities of the Jews, Book 13, Chapter 3, and found more of this story, which some of it seems spurious, but basically there's another place in the writings of Josephus which this occurs, which is also the Wars of the Jews, Book 7, and let's see what chapter that is, Chapter 10. So it's mentioned twice. They're a little bit different. In Wars of the Jews, the Onias that builds this temple looks like it's Onias III, and in Antiquities it looks like it's Onias IV. And scholars think that it actually is Onias IV, and because that just makes more sense. But then, in Chapter 3 of Book 13, it basically starts out the friendship that was between Onias and Ptolemy Philometor, and how Onias built a temple in Egypt like that at Jerusalem. And it says, "But then the son of Onias the high priest, who was of the same name with his father, and who fled to King Ptolemy, who was called Philometor, lived now in Alexandria, as we have said already. When this Onias saw that Judea was oppressed by the Macedonians and their kings, out of a desire to purchase to himself a memorial and an eternal fame, he resolved to send to King Ptolemy and Queen Cleopatra to ask to leave them, that he might build a temple in Egypt like to that at Jerusalem, and might ordain Levites and priests out of their own stock. The chief reason why he was desirous so to do was that he relied upon the prophet Isaiah, who lived about 600 years before, and foretold that there certainly was to be a temple built to Almighty God in Egypt by a man that was a Jew. Onias was elevated with this prediction and wrote the following epistle to Ptolemy and Cleopatra: "Having done many and great things for you in the affairs of the war, by the assistance of God, that is in Cilicia and Phoenicia, I came at length with the Jews to Leontopolis and to other places of your nation here, where I found the greatest part of your people had temples in an improper manner, and that on this account they bear ill will against one another, which happens to the Egyptians by reason of the multitudes of their temples and the differences of opinion about divine worship. and that certainly sounds familiar. Now I found a very fit place in a castle that has its name from the country Diana. This place is full of materials of several sorts and replenished with sacred animals. I desire, therefore, that you will grant me leave to purge this holy place, which belongs to no master and has fallen down, and to build a temple there to Almighty God, after the pattern of that in Jerusalem, and of the same dimensions, that may be for the benefit of thyself and of thy wife and thy children. And those Jews which dwell in Egypt may have a place whither they may come to meet together in mutual harmony with one another, and to be subservient to thy advantages. For the prophet Isaiah foretold that there should be an altar in Egypt to the Lord God, and many other such things did he prophesy relating to that place. And it goes on from there. This prophecy that Onias is talking about is in Isaiah 19:19, which says, I'll start in verse 18. In that day, 5 cities in the land of Egypt will speak the language of Canaan and will swear by the Lord of hosts. One will be called the city of destruction. In that day, there will be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar to the Lord and its border. So he was using that scripture basically to as his proof text that, hey, this was a prophesied event and Onias should build this temple. And then we get into some letters. Then it looks like Ptolemy and Cleopatra wrote back to him and said, I don't know if this sounds like a really good idea. Just to take a little excerpt out of the letter, it says, we cannot but wonder that it should be pleasing to God to have a temple erected on a place so unclean and so full of sacred animals. But since you say that Isaiah the prophet foretold this long ago, we give thee leave to do it, if it may be done according to your law, so that we may not appear to have at all offended God herein. So that seems kind of like a kind of a strange thing, that some scholars think that the letter is spurious. But I will say that an archaeologist did find this temple. This archaeologist's name was Petri, and he excavated the site at Tel El Yehudi in 1905 to 1906, and it was supervised by a man named J. Garrow Duncan. And it says the main features at this site was a large mound, variously interpreted as military or religious, dated by Petri to the Second Intermediate Period, by others later. Extensive cemeteries. Let's see, a Hebrew temple of God established by the high priest Onias under the protection of Ptolemy IV in the late 3rd century BC. Pottery, various things that they found. But it says that they did discover the site of the Hebrew temple of God of the 3rd century BC and retrieval of archaeological fragments. And so there is some archaeological data on this. And there was a temple actually before that, which is really interesting, that was built, destroyed, and built again. And they found this other temple. It's the Jewish temple at Elephantine. And they found something called the Elephantine papyri, which requested the rebuilding of a Jewish temple at Elephantine. And this was an island like in the River Nile. And they have an archaeological dig that proves that this Jewish temple was there as well. And in addition to the archaeological dig, they found this papyrus that basically says it. Now, this is a little excerpt out of that papyrus. It says, now our forefathers built this temple in the fortress of Elephantine back in the days of the kingdom of Egypt, and when Cambyses came to Egypt, he found it built. They, the Persians, knocked down all the temples of the gods, but not one did any damage to this temple. And then in this letter, they're asking if they could rebuild this temple. And in the archaeological dig, they found basically this temple had 2 floors, one tile floor and then another one, so it looks like it was destroyed, and then they laid another floor over the top of it. so that is really interesting. Also, this temple by Onias is mentioned again in War of the Jews, as I said. Just a little more information is kind of given on it, but it sounds like they did animal sacrifices. They restored the true, the high priest would stay with the family of Onias, and it was just a place. Actually, some I've read as well that some people think that the Septuagint was written by Alexandrian Jews. Well, it was written by Alexandrian Jews, but that these Jews, may have been preserved or whatever, kind of from, these temple sites out that way. And some people think that the Jews that were from that Elephantine area may have gone south and then brought the Jewish religion to Ethiopia and taught them, the feasts and festivals and proper sacrificial services and all that kind of stuff. So that was kind of an interesting little side note. I doubt we'll get any further into that as we're studying Hanukkah. But did anyone have any questions or comments about that? Okay. Well, then I will hand it over to my husband. I want to do a recap of Chapter 9. Okay.
All right, so obviously today we're going to start reading in Chapter 10, but first I'll do a somewhat quick recap of Chapter 9. It's hard to do anything quick because there's so many things going on, as you guys remember from last night. So the beginning of Chapter 9, we have King Antiochus Epiphanes, and he had decided that he was going to raid this temple of Diana, which is a temple in Persia, and he had heard that it was full of all these riches and weapons and everything, so he goes to raid that temple, and as he's doing that, he's driven back by the people. He's kind of shocked at the fortitude that they have there and their desire to fight, and so anyway, he's driven back. And then as that happens, he ends up learning of a couple of his top commanders they stayed back, and they ended up getting defeated when they were fighting against Judea. And so again, he's now realizing the strength that the Jews have gained. He's chalking this up a lot to God, to their God, to the Jewish God. But these two concerns, the fact that he wasn't able to conquer this temple that he thought was going to be easily conquered, and the fact that his two commanders were defeated by the Jews, causes him all this stress, and then he gets, here's that word, distemper again. He falls under distemper and dies. Basically, he believed that his misfortune, and he's conveying this to his people, he believed that his misfortune was brought on by the fact that the Jewish God was punishing him for the miseries that he brought on the Jewish nation by trying to attack both Judas and this temple, the Temple of Diana. So before he passed away, though, he had appointed Philip to take over in an interim position as his son was only 9 years old. His son is Antiochus Eupator. So anyway, he's got this plan for Philip to take over as interim king until his son was ready to take that position. However, Lysias, when that death occurs, he's the one that ends up announcing the death, and he announces that his son, the 9-year-old, ends up being king. So that's what ends up happening, and we would assume from this that Philip ends up fleeing. It doesn't really say, but we're going to find out later that Philip was in Persia. So we know Philip went to Persia probably for his safety. So now we have this new king, the 9-year-old Antiochus, and due to all these, there was a bunch of renegade Jews that didn't like his father kind of telling them. His father believed in, the Jewish laws and everything, and felt that they were oppressed by him, and were maybe somewhat Hellenized or whatever. And so Antiochus, and so what these renegades were doing is they were coming from the citadel, like a fortress area that was attached to the temple, and they would attack people that were coming to do sacrifices at the temple and that kind of thing. And so Antiochus decided that he needs to stop that, so he sent troops into the temple. Actually, I'm sorry. This is Judas who's upset by this, not Antiochus. So anyway, all these attacks are going on, and Judas puts together an army and starts to attack these renegades. And the renegades kind of, they're not really a military or an army or anything like that. They're renegades. They're just kind of doing sort of guerrilla warfare. I'm going to use that term again. And a bunch of them escape, and they end up getting to Antiochus, and they convince Antiochus to give them some military help against Judas. And Antiochus ends up giving them that. He convinces them that they're being oppressed by Judas and the keeping of the Jewish law and all that kind of thing. So anyway, Antiochus amasses this huge army. There's 100,000 footmen, 20,000 horsemen, and 32 elephants. And they were all commanded by Lysias. So anyway, they go to battle against Judas. And if you guys remember, during that battle, that's the one where Eleazar ends up dying in battle. He's crushed by the elephant. And then the Jewish forces actually were pretty outnumbered, and Judas ends up fleeing back to Jerusalem, and Lysias, the commander of the Grecian army, follows, or the Seleucid army, I should say, follows them, and they have this long, hard battle. Both sides are fighting, and both sides have their provisions starting to run low, and what ends up happening is Lysias realizes that Philip now is coming from Persia, and the king, Antiochus, realizes this is happening, and so they end up realizing they're going to have to split their forces a little bit and fight against Philip and his forces, where Philip's coming back to kind of gain control. It actually, the way that Josephus puts it, is to control the empire's affairs of the empire, something like that. But anyway, they're realizing, okay, we've got like little supplies, we've been fighting for a long time, now we've got this battle against Philip, and so Antiochus decides that he wants to make a deal with Judas and the temple people, like, let's just be friends, I'm going to let you keep your Jewish traditions and keep your Jewish way of worship. And everybody agreed. Judas was happy with that, and everyone in the temple was happy with that, and that kind of relieved the stress on Antiochus, so he could go deal with this Philip that was coming. However, Antiochus goes into the temple and sees the strength that's in there. He didn't realize it, apparently, and because of that, I think he had a little bit of fear that the Jews, had too much of a fortress there, so it actually says the temple, but they took, I don't know why they wouldn't take the walls of the citadel down, but they took the walls of the temple down, and they basically broke his oath and ordered the temple destroyed and captured the high priest, who was Menelaus, and ended up slaying Menelaus. And then during that time, that gave Philip enough time to actually gain a little bit of governmental control. And when Antiochus heard about that, he made war against Philip and ended up slewing Philip and got rid of that problem. And in the meantime, and this is kind of getting into what Mary just talked about, Onias, he was actually, Menelaus was his uncle, so I would assume, he ended up fleeing to Egypt, like Mary said. And I would assume that he did that either out of fear because his uncle had been slain as the high priest, so he may have feared for his own life, but he was basically upset that the new priest was not of priestly stock. He was basically placed there by Lysias, basically placed him in. So basically the Jewish priest was picked by the Greeks. So anyway, he's upset. I'm assuming that he's fearful for his life, being related to the high priest that was slain, and ends up going to King Ptolemy, where Mary kind of picked up on that, and he gained great esteem with Ptolemy and Cleopatra and convinced them to build that temple. And that's kind of where we're at right now, moving into chapter 10. So are there any questions or comments or anything that anyone wanted to talk about with chapter 10, or even corrections on chapter 9? I'm sorry, talking about chapter 9. If I got something different than you were thinking, or so any comments on chapter 9?
I was just going to comment how, today I was reading a little bit more of some Antiquities, right, by Josephus, but prior chapters, and we're talking back into the time of Ezra, Nehemiah, that time, right, when they're sent to go back to Jerusalem by Cyrus. And, the trouble, I'm just finding that in every story when it comes to the Jews, there's the other nations are always so fearful of them, whether it's, there's a lot of them, there's too many of them, lest they outnumber us and fight against us. It's always been the case, isn't it, when other nations are, they get afraid of the Jews. So just to point out that, the Jews hold a very high esteem amongst other nations.
It's funny you mentioned that, Anna, because Ed and I were talking about that exact thing earlier today. I had noticed the same thing when I was researching this temple. It definitely seems like the Jews reproduce very quickly and are definitely a force to be reckoned with, for sure. Yes, I noticed the same thing.
So any other comments on chapter 9? All right. Is there anyone who would like to read or help me read on chapter 10? And if not, that's fine.
Oh, I was just going to mention, I was Googling like how to translate or how to pronounce, sorry. Is it Antiochus, Antiochus? It's actually both. So don't be afraid to accidentally say either one.
Well, hopefully I can do that with all the Greek names in there.
Yeah.
We're transitioning now into like a mixture of Greek. The Romans are starting to gain some power now, and so we're going to start reading some Roman names as opposed to all Greek names like we were. But the Roman Empire is starting to creep in now, so that's kind of going to get interesting. All right, well, I'll start reading here in chapter 10, paragraph 1. So again, we're in Antiquity of the Jews, book 12, chapter 10, paragraph 1. And there's this little pre-summary that's with every chapter. This one says, how Bacchides, the general of Demetrius' army, made an expedition against Judea and returned without success, and how Nicanor was sent a little afterward against Judas and perished together with his army, as also concerning the death of Alchemist and the succession of Judas. It's interesting because we have Demetrius now, obviously, as the king, so I would imagine we're going to look. I'm surprised it doesn't talk about whatever happened to Antiochus, young Antiochus, who at this time I think is about 11. So anyway, but his reign only lasted 2 years, so it is obviously going to come to an end. So let's start reading. About the same time, Demetrius, the son of Seleucus, fled from Rome and took Tripoli, a city of Syria, and set the diadem on his own head. Well, there we go. He also gathered certain mercenary soldiers together and entered into his kingdom and was joyfully received by all who delivered themselves up to him. And when they had taken Antiochus the king and Lysias, who was the general, they brought them to him alive, both of whom were immediately put to death by the command of Demetrius. When Antiochus had reigned 2 years, as we have already elsewhere related. But there were now many of the wicked Jewish renegades that came together to him, and with them Alchemist the high priest, who accused the whole nation, and particularly Judas and his brethren, and said that they had slain all his friends, and that those in the kingdom that were of his party and waited for his return were by them put to death, that these men had ejected them out of their own country and caused them to be sojourners in a foreign land, and they desired that he would send some of his own friends and know from him what mischief Judas' part had done. Judas's part had done. What did you say?
I have Judas's party had done.
Oh, mine says part. It could be party. Judas's party had done. So anyway, well, there's what happened to Antiochus. So that's put to death.
So he was quite young still, right? 'Cause
11 years old. Yeah.
Right, 9 + 2, yeah.
And then you have this Alchemist, the high priest. He was appointed by, Lysias. So he was really appointed by the Seleucid, leadership, not by the Jews. So it's not surprising that he was kind of betraying Judas with the new king,
Was he a Jew? Alchemist? No, hang on. Huh?
He was a Jew, but he was more of like a renegade Jew, and he wasn't. Remember, Onias was upset because he was from, Menelaus was Onias's uncle.
Right.
Onias was claiming that, this alchemist didn't have the right bloodline.
Right.
They falsified something or whatever so that he could become the high priest. He basically was placed there by the Seleucid Empire and not by whatever would normally happen. It sounds like Onias felt that he was more in line to be the next priest. Mary's got something on.
I just looked up Wikipedia. It says, according to 1 Maccabees, he was a descendant of the biblical Aaron, brother of Moses, but not in the high priestly line. And being ambitious for the official high priest, he traveled to Antioch to secure the assistance of the Seleucid king Demetrius I Soter, who had just overthrown Antiochus Epicurus. Alchemist was one of the Hellenizing party and therefore bitterly opposed by the Maccabees. So
can you repeat, how was he related to Aaron, did you say? Again?
Okay, it says, according to 1 Maccabees, he was a descendant of the biblical Aaron, brother of Moses, but not in the high priestly line. And being ambitious for the office of high priest, he traveled to Antioch to secure the assistance of the Seleucid king Demetrius, who had just overthrown Antiochus Epicurus. Alchemist was of the Hellenizing party and therefore bitterly opposed by the Maccabees.
And we're probably going to get into some of exactly that in the next paragraph or so.
Okay, so he's a brother of Moses.
That's where we're at right here in Josephus. Demetrius has just defeated Antiochus, young Antiochus Jupiter.
Can I read this next little paragraph
Sure.
real quick as a prelude to what you're going to read? It says, Demetrius sent an army under Bacchides to establish Alchemist as the high priesthood at Jerusalem. The favor with which Alchemist was received by the Jews at Jerusalem on account of his Aaronic descent was soon turned to hate by his cruelties. When Bacchides and his army returned to Antioch, the Hasmonean Judea Maccabee attacked and overcame Alchemist and drove him also to Syria. There he secured from Demetrius another army led by Nicanor, who, failing to overcome Judah by treachery, attacked him directly, but was defeated and killed.
So is there any other comments on that? So we can start reading paragraph 2 here. So at this, Demetrius was very angry and sent Bacchides, a friend of Antiochus Epiphanes, a good man, and one that had been trusted with all Mesopotamia, and gave him an army, and committed Alcimus the high priest to his care, and gave him charge to slay Judas and those that were with him. So Bacchides made haste and went out to Antioch with his army, and when he had come to Judea, he sent to Judas and his brethren to discourse with him about a league of friendship and peace, for he had mind to take him by treachery. But Judas did not give credit to him, for he saw that he came with a great army, with so great an army as men do not bring when they come to make peace, but to make war. However, some of the people acquiesced in what Bacchides caused to be proclaimed, and supposing they should undergo no considerable harm from Alcimus, who was their countryman, they went over to them. And when they had received oaths from both of them that neither they themselves nor of the same sentiments should come to any harm, they entrusted themselves with them. But Bacchides troubled not himself about the oaths he had taken, but slew 80 of them, although by not keeping the faith with those that first went over, he deterred all the rest who had intentions to go over to him for doing it. But as he had gone out of Jerusalem and was at the village called Bethzetho, he sent out and caught many of the deserters, and some of the people also, and slew them all, and enjoined all that lived in the country to submit to Alcimus. So he left him there with some part of the army, that he might have wherewith to keep the country in obedience, and return to Antioch to King Demetrius. So are there any comments on that?
Yeah, I was just noticing the footnote 25 there, and it was referring to the little 3-word statement, a good man, referring to Bacchides, right? But
right.
Yeah, he's not the good man. It says it is no way probable that Josephus would call, well, here it says Bacchidoa, that bitter and bloody enemy of the Jews, as our present copies have it, a man good or kind and gentle. What the author of the first book of Maccabees, whom Josephus here follows, instead of that character, says of him is that he was a great man in the kingdom and faithful to his king, and which was very probably Josephus's meaning also. So, not that he was a good man, he was just faithful to the king.
Interesting.
And actually, we've run into that a couple other times with exactly the same kind of wording, not really meaning, like where Josephus is calling someone from the Seleucid empire great, just meaning they were greatly disposed to the Seleucid mindset or whatever. Okay, so we'll move on to to paragraph 3. But Alcimus was desirous to have the dominion more firmly assured to him, and understanding that if he could bring it about that the multitude should be his friends, he should govern with greater security. He spake kind words to them all, and discoursed to each of them after an agreeable and pleasant manner, by which means he quickly had a great body of men and an army about him, although the greater part of them were of the wicked and the deserters. With these, whom he used as his servants and soldiers, he went all over the country and slew all that he could find of Judah's party. But when Judas saw that Alcimus was already become great and had destroyed many of the good and holy men of the country, he also went all over the country and destroyed those that were of the other party. But when Alcimus saw that he was not able to oppose Judas, nor was equal to him in strength, he resolved to apply himself to King Demetrius for his assistance. So he came to Antioch and irritated him against Judas and accused him, alleging that he had undergone a great many miseries by this means, and that he would do more mischief unless he was prevented and brought to punishment, which must be done by sending a powerful force against him. So Judas has another one coming up here, another battle.
Man, Judas is pretty intent on his mission, huh?
So let's go ahead and just move on. So Demetrius, being already of the opinion that would be a thing pernicious to his own affairs to overlook Judas, now he was becoming so great, sent against him Nicanor, the most kind and most faithful of all of his friends, for he it was who fled away from him from the city of Rome, and also gave him many forces, as he thought sufficient for him to conquer Judas, withal, and bade him not to spare the nation at all. When Nicanor had come to Jerusalem, he did not resolve to fight Judas immediately, but judged it better to get him into the power by treachery. So he sent him a message of peace, and said there was no manner of necessity for them to fight and hazard themselves, and that he would give him his oath that he would do no harm to him, or that he only came with some friends in order to let him know that King Demetrius' intentions were, and what opinion he had of their nation. When Nicanor had delivered this message, Judas and his brother complied with him, and suspecting no deceit, they gave him assurances of friendships and received Nicanor and his army. But while he was saluting Judas, and they were talking together, he gave a certain signal to his own soldiers upon which they were to siege upon Judas. But he perceived the treachery and ran back to his own soldiers and fled away with them. So upon this discovery of his purpose and of the snares laid for Judas, Nicanor determined to make open war with him, and gathered his army together and prepared for fighting him. And upon joining battle with him at a certain village called, Cappasalarma, he beat Judas and forced him to fly to that citadel which was at Jerusalem.
I'll read the 26th footnote.
Okay.
I have it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Josephus' copies must have been corrupted when they here gave victory to Nicanor, contrary to the words following, which imply that he who was beaten fled into the citadel, which for certain belonged to the city of David, or to Mount Zion, and was in the possession of Nicanor's garrison, and not of Judah's. Also, it is contrary to the express words of Josephus' original author, 1 Maccabees 7:32, who says that Nicanor lost about 5,000 men and fled to the city of David.
And actually, the next, as we read on here in paragraph 5, we're going to see that it's Nicanor that's in the citadel, not Judas. So that's pretty interesting. So anyway, are there any questions on paragraph 4?
Okay, so sorry. So in paragraph 4, it's telling us that Judas was the one that was beat. Yeah, he beat Judas, it says, right? But then footnote 26 is saying that can't be true.
Right.
Because it wasn't Judas that fled to the citadel.
Right.
That's interesting.
So I think they just, maybe somebody accidentally wrote Judas instead of Nicanor possibly there, just one word that's wrong. Judas should maybe be Nicanor. Right before that, what is it, the 23rd footnote? Mine doesn't have the same thing.
The 26th footnote. But he beat Judas, forced him to flee to the citadel.
Right.
Yeah, it sounds like they were corrupted. The copies must have been corrupted, so somebody changed something around, eh?
Yeah, I think Judas should have been Nicanor, most likely, in that last sentence there. Yeah, because and the other thing is, Nicanor had lost 5,000 men, so that sounds like a defeat. Okay, so are there any other comments on paragraph 4? All right, so paragraph 5, and here we go with Nicanor. So this, according to what we read before, if we hadn't read the footnote, we would assume that it's Judas that's in the citadel, right? So, and when Nicanor came down from the citadel into the temple, some of the priests and elders met him and saluted him and showed him the sacrifices which they said they had offered to God for the king, upon which he blasphemed and threatened them. And unless the people would deliver up Judas to him, upon his return he would pull down their temple. And when he had thus threatened them, he departed from Jerusalem. But the priests fell into tears out of grief of what he had said, and besought God to deliver them from their enemies. But now Nicanor, when he was gone out of Jerusalem, and was at a certain village called Betharon, he there pitched his camp, another army out of Syria having joined him, and Judas pitched his camp in Adasa, another village, which was 30 furlongs distance from Betharon, having no more than 1,000 soldiers. And when he had encouraged them not to be dismayed at the multitude of their enemies, nor to regard how many they were against, whom they were going to fight, but to consider who they themselves were, and for what great rewards they hazard themselves, and to attack the enemy courageously, he led them out to fight, and joining battle with Nicanor, which proved to be a severe one, he overcame the enemy and slew many of them, and at last Nicanor himself, as he was fighting gloriously, fell, upon whose fall the army did not stay, but when they had lost their general, they were put to flight and threw down their arms. Judas also pursued them and slew them, and gave notice by the sound of his trumpets to the neighboring villages that he had conquered the enemy, which when the inhabitants heard, they put on their armor hastily and met their enemies in the face as they were running away, and slew them, inasmuch as not one of them escaped out of this battle, who were in number 9,000. This victory happened to fall on the 13th day of that month, which the Jews called Adar, and by the Macedonians Dystrus, and the Jews therein celebrate this victory every year and esteem it as a festival day, after which the Jewish nations were, for a while, free from wars and enjoyed peace, but afterward they returned to their former state of wars and hazards. Were there footnotes in there that I passed up?
I don't see anything.
No.
So that festival, the 13th day of that month, which is called Adar. So that's the 12th month of the year, from what I recall. Adar.
Yep.
And the Jews therein celebrate this victory every year. Esteem it as a festival day. So do we know what that is?
Haven't we?
We've done
correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like we've done that Nicanor thing over that period of time in the 12th month. Haven't we read Nicanor? I think from Maccabees. Am I?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Not that we were celebrating it, but we were just looking into it, during that period of time, kind of like we did with Purim. Not really celebrating it, but just looking into it, or those other feasts and jubilees and that kind of thing.
Right. Something's coming to memory with that, but we don't remember the name, do we?
I can look really quick.
Isn't it Nicanor? It's actually called
I
Nicanor.
think it was. Well, I'll look it up, Anna.
Okay. Are there any other comments about the paragraph?
What is Hanukkah celebrating? I thought maybe that was what it was.
No, Hanukkah. I think we're actually past that part. That was the part where they regained the temple 4 years later. So on the 25th of Kislev, it was attacked by Antiochus Epiphanes, and then 4 years later, Judas Maccabeus on the 25th of Kislev rededicated the temple So that was like in a completely different month.
Right.
Which that's the feast we're celebrating right now, is the Feast of Hanukkah. So we're kind of past that in the reading of Josephus. We're like past that Hanukkah story.
And Hanukkah's 8 days, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And this here we're talking about in this paragraph is only 1 day of festival. It's a festival day.
Do you want me to read
I'm finding that every time there's a battle and there's victory, there's a festival. So
kind of like the Sabbath, really, when you think about it, right?
Yeah. So I think we're going to be having a lot of festivals that we don't even know of yet.
Right?
Well, there's a beautiful story.
What'd you say, Leroy?
So that's a beautiful story where Judas won against a terrible odds like that. That's really encouraging.
Right, right.
We have, just so you know, with Nicanor, the memorial of the defeat of Nicanor was February 21st, 2016. Nicanor's defeat, March 4th, 2015. We've got one. So yeah, it looks like we go over this. Oops, uh-oh. And we did also the Day of Deliverance, Adar 13, that was March 15th in 2014. So I don't know if we didn't do it in 2017. I don't see
Oh, you're looking at YouTube video.
I didn't see a YouTube video for that.
May not have posted it.
Oh, maybe not, right. But that's true.
But yeah, it's in the spring of every year, basically. And it is, what is it's called there? The dedication.
Just the memorial of the defeat of Nicanor.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone have any other comments? I'd like to say if there was a holiday for Judas's victories, every single day would be one. Because
he had a lot.
I mean, we've read through dozens and dozens of them. So, yeah, I mean, it's amazing how many victories he had. So anyway,
God was with him.
God was definitely with them, and all the surrounding nations believed God was with them, and that was part of their victory, you know, and obviously the soldiers, you know, the Jewish soldiers felt that God was with them because, you know, they fought so courageously and with so much passion that the other armies couldn't match them.
The other army didn't have their heart in it that much.
There you go.
Right.
It was just a job for them.
Yep. And there was, you know, a lot of the armies, like when we've been reading through this, you know, speaking about having your heart in it, a lot of the armies that they fought against were like mercenary armies. So they really were just fighting, I guess, for money, you know. I mean, that's what a mercenary is, right? So they weren't in the cause, they were just in it for money. And I don't think I've read anything yet that had the Jewish army, you know, kind of, what's the right word, adding to their army with mercenaries at all. I don't think the Jews used mercenaries.
They were fighting for their life.
Their freedom and their freedom to worship. And if, you know, really, if Mattathias hadn't convinced his sons to be so courageous and so full of heart, you know, that would have been the end of the Jewish nation right there. It would have ended.
Yeah.
So
there'd be no 144,000.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Should we move on to paragraph 6? And that'll end. Paragraph 6 is the last one of chapter 10, and probably that'll put us right at about an hour, which maybe, you know, we're going to have a lot of these. I think all of the normal calls are going to be Hanukkah calls, so maybe we'll try to keep them to like 45 minutes to an hour, somewhere in there. And if we run over, that's fine. But just so it's easier for everybody to get on, knowing that, we'll try to keep the calls a little shorter. Okay, Book 12, Chapter 10, Paragraph 6. But now, as the high priest Alchemist was resolving to pull down the wall of the sanctuary, which had been there of old time, and had been built by the holy prophets, he was smitten suddenly by God and fell down. This stroke made him fall down speechless upon the ground, and undergoing torments for many days, he at length died, when he had been high priest 4 years. And when he was dead, the people bestowed his high priesthood on Judas, who, hearing the power of the Romans, and that they had conquered in war Galatia, Iberia, and Carthage, and Libya, and that besides these they had subdued Greece, and their kings, Perseus and Philip, and Antiochus the Great also, he resolved to enter into a league of friendship with them. He therefore sent to Rome some of his friends, Eupolemus the son of John, and Jason the son of Eleazar, and by them desired the Romans that they would assist them and be their friends, and would write to Demetrius that he would not fight against the Jews. So the Senate received the ambassadors that came from Judas to Rome, and discoursed with them about the errand on which they came, and then granted them a league of assistance. They also made a decree concerning it, and sent a copy of it into Judea. It was also laid up in the Capitol and engraven in brass. The decree itself was this: the decree of the Senate concerning a league of assistance and friendship with the nation of the Jews. It shall not be lawful for any that are subject to the Romans to make war with the nation of the Jews, nor to assist those that do so, either by sending them corn or ships or money. And if any attack be made upon the Jews, the Romans shall assist them as far as they are able, and again, if any attack be made upon the Romans, the Jews shall assist them. And if the Jews have a mind to add to or to take away anything from this league of assistance, that shall be done with the common consent of the Romans. And whatever addition shall thus be made, it shall be of force. This decree was written by Eupolemus, the son of John, and by Jason, the son of Eleazar, when Judas was high priest of the nation, and Simon his brother was general of the army. And this was the first league that the Romans made with the Jews, and was managed after this manner.
Interesting.
Want me to read footnote 28?
I think there was a few footnotes, right? But yeah, go ahead.
Oh, well, 28 says, this subscription is wanting, 1 Maccabees 8:17-29, and must be the words of Josephus, who by mistake thought, as we have just now seen, that Judas was at this time high priest, and accordingly then reckoned his brother Jonathan to be the general of the army, which yet he seems not to have been till after the death of Judas. So yeah, it sounds like, according to Maccabees, then, sorry, my dog is on my lap. After that, Judas was not the high priest. And I will say, hold on one second. Back in this Wikipedia thing we're reading about alchemists, interestingly, it says that alchemists, let's see, he secured from Demetrius another army led by Nicanor, who, failing to overcome Judah by treachery, attacked him directly but was defeated and killed. A third and greater army under Bacchides, again, was dispatched to reinstall Alchemist. Judah was defeated and killed. Alchemist established his high priest among and a strong garrison left in Jerusalem to maintain him, but he did not long enjoy this triumph, since he died soon after, and while he was pulling down the wall of the temple that divided the courts of the Gentiles from that of the Israelites. Then it says, his successor as high priest is unknown, though some scholars suggest that this was the teacher of righteousness later founder of the Essenes.
Really? Sorry, where are you reading that, Mayor?
That is actually this. There's no footnote on this last sentence here. It says his successor, Alchemist's successor as high priest, is unknown, though some scholars suggest that this was the teacher of righteousness, the later founder of the Essenes. And I have no footnote to why he thinks that.
What are you reading?
Oh, this is from Wikipedia. This is Wikipedia on alchemists.
Could you read that again?
Yep, it says that. Well, and we don't know. I mean, I'm just reading this from Wikipedia, and I don't see a footnote on it, so I don't know. It just says his successor, Alchemist's successor as high priest, is unknown, though some scholars suggest that it was the teacher of righteousness, the later founder of the Essenes. Of course, we know that what we just read says that Judas was the successor, but of course our footnotes say that is a mistake.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
There's another footnote right after Romans there. I'm sorry, my book doesn't have the numbers on the footnote. It's got some other nomenclature, but another footnote on this paragraph. How well the Roman histories agree to this account of the conquest and powerful condition of the Romans at this time. See the notes in Haberkamp's edition, only that the number of the senators of Rome was then just 320 is, I think, only known from 1 Maccabees 8:15. That is definitely some notes for scholars who are really looking at detail. And then there's another footnote at the very end of this last paragraph, right after Eleazar. Want to read that one there?
Where it says this account of the miserable death of Alchemist, that one?
Yeah. Oh, no. The subscription is wanting.
Oh, I think I read
Oh, okay.
I'll read it again, though.
Okay.
This subscription is wanting, 1 Maccabees 8:17 and 29, must be the words of Josephus, who by mistake thought, as we have just now seen, that Judas was at this time high priest, and accordingly then reckoned his brother Jonathan to be the general of the army, which yet he seems not to have been till after the death of Judas. And the footnote number 27 right before that says this. This account of the miserable death of Alchemist, or Jacmus, the wicked high priest, the first that was not of the family of the high priests, and made by a vile heathen Lysias, before the death of Judas, and of Judas's succession to him as high priest, both here and at the conclusion of this book, directly contradicts 1 Maccabees 9, verse 54 to 57, which places his death after the death of Judas, and says not a syllable of the high priesthood of Judas. How well the Roman histories agree to this account of the conquest and powerful condition of the Romans at this time, see notes on Haberkamp's edition, only that the number of the senators of Rome was just then 320, is, I think, only known from 1 Maccabees 8:15.
It does, obviously Judas was a powerful general, and he was kind of given that position by his father. At least, his father spoke to his brothers about Judas Maccabeus being, a great war leader. So it's sort of odd that he would take on the role of high priest. Any other comments?
Okay, so that footnote 27 is telling us that Alchemist actually died after Judas died?
Right. Yeah, it says this account of the miserable death of Alchemist before the death of Judas, and the Judas's succession to the high priest, both here directly contradicts 1 Maccabees. So he's saying that in 1 Maccabees places Alchemist's death after that of Judas, and says, and Maccabees doesn't even talk about Judas's high priesthood.
Right. Wow.
Let's see. Yeah. So that's kind of a interesting problem, which we've encountered before. It's hard to say if Josephus's writings were corrupted, or if Maccabees was corrupted, or Maccabees definitely in past studies, we knew that, Josephus is writing a historical account from other sources, probably had Maccabees as well, way after the fact. So this was, whatever Josephus was, shortly after the time of Christ. He was witness to the destruction of Jerusalem, that kind of thing, and became, part of the Roman royal family, kind of during that war. But that, it just does differ. So either Josephus was either corrupted or he had more sources, that we don't have. All we have is Maccabees and Josephus, but he must have had more, and maybe he determined that Maccabees wasn't a good source for some reason. Even though Maccabees was more contemporary to this time, doesn't necessarily mean that it was correct. So that's just an interesting question.
Maybe go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say I don't know what all sources he had.
So maybe we're not sure that Judas took the office of high priest.
It seems weird since it wasn't from. I don't think his Mattathias was like a lowly priest, right? So Mattathias, his father, was a priesthood, but not from the high priesthood.
Correct.
So it seems odd that Judas would even take that position if he wasn't from that royal line. So that seems odd.
And it seems like, again, Judas was a general. He wasn't acting as a priest. His father gave him the badge of general, or of a war leader, and his other brother, Mattathias, his dad gave his other brother. Let me look up the name real quick.
Yeah, that makes sense, right? Because to be a high priest, you have to be in the bloodline, and they took that seriously, right? So that does make sense. That why would Judas be a high priest?
Right.
Yeah, it would more likely be one of his other brothers, and even again, that's the wrong bloodline too. So, although a lot of priests have been killed already, so there might have been lacking the bloodline too.
That's what I was saying. Maybe there wasn't any Levites.
Right.
Okay. Well, are there any other comments?
Praise God.
Amen. Okay. Well, would anyone like to close in prayer?
I will.
Thank
Your
you.
Heavenly Family, we see how you can give the few the victory over the many. And we ask that you would do that for us in our time of need. In the name of the branch, he and she. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so another call on Sunday, and we'll talk then. Lila Tov.
Lila Tov.
Good night.